Hello and welcome, happy campers. I'm Gina Ippolito, your resident 80s slasher horror flick nerd, and this time I'm talking about one of the ones that kicked them all off, 1980's Friday the 13th. So turn down the lights, but don't go near the water. This is The Witching Hour. The Friday the 13th series was another one that I marathoned with my friends in high school. The franchise boasts a crazy 10 films, and that's not including Freddy vs. Jason, the 2009 Friday the 13th reboot film, or the 1987 TV series. Although, to be fair, that last one was Friday the 13th in name only, and focused on a group of cousins who own an antique store and discover the antiques are all cursed. It had pretty much nothing to do with the films, and most fans pretend it doesn't exist. While not quite as critically lauded as Halloween or A Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th has left an enduring legacy and earned its place in slasher horror history. And while it didn't invent a lot of the tropes it became known for, it certainly compiled them all together to become the quintessential campy 80s slasher. And along the way, it set the tone for horror movies for the next decade, and impacted the genre in ways that are still evident today. If you're a horror fan, it's definitely a necessary watch because it set the template for so many others. Also, it might help you learn a lesson or two about how to survive a horror movie.
No, they're all dead. They're all dead.
On October 25th, 1978, an independent slasher horror about an unstoppable killer stalking teenagers in a suburban town was released. The film was directed by a not yet famous John Carpenter and starred Jamie Lee Curtis, who at the time was more known for being the daughter of famous actors Janet Leigh and Tony Curtis than she was for the roles she was playing. Halloween had a budget of $300,000 and grossed over $70 million and was officially a hit, so producer-director Sean S. Cunningham decided he wanted to rip it off. Cunningham started in the world of low-budget films, and in 1972 he produced The Last House on the Left, which was written and directed by Wes Craven. The two had worked together in low-budget softcore porn a few years earlier. The horror genre at the time had a lot of overlap, and Craven actually had to borrow money from Cunningham at one point when no one around town was buying his script for A Nightmare on Elm Street. But in 1978, Cunningham was worried about paying his own rent. He'd had a little bit of success making a couple of kids' movies, including 1978's Here Come the Tigers, which was basically a ripoff of The Bad News Bears. Cunningham directed that film, which was written by former novelist Victor Miller. When Cunningham saw how hot Halloween was and how much attention it was getting for the people involved, he went to his buddy Miller and asked him to write him something like Halloween. Before the script was even written, Cunningham took an ad out in Variety, proclaiming it the most terrifying film ever made. The ad showed the title of the film, Friday the 13th, just about the only thing he and Miller had at the time, breaking through glass. The ad was a success, and Cunningham started getting phone calls from potential financial backers. Miller wasn't a huge horror fan and was in fact a self-proclaimed wuss, but he went to see Halloween in theaters and borrowed some of its main ideas. He took 2 weeks to write the screenplay. Miller wanted to start his movie out with a pre-existing evil, something that was set in motion before the audience comes in, like Michael Myers. Then he added in a group of randy teenagers in a location where adults couldn't intervene and protect them, a summer camp, and then he had that evil pick them off one by one. For production purposes, the film was referred to as Long Night at Camp Blood. Hilariously, Miller has said he was too much of a wuss to ever even go to summer camp when he was a kid, so he also wasn't familiar with that world. The movie opens on Camp Crystal Lake in 1958. Two camp counselors sneak away from the rest of the group to get frisky and are promptly killed by an unseen murderer. Then it jumps to Friday, June 13th, present day. Camp Crystal Lake is reopening after years of being closed, and Annie is hitchhiking her way there to be the camp's cook. The other teenage camp counselors arrive to get the camp ready. One by one, they die in gruesome ways until only the final girl, Alice, is left. Alice is stranded without a car or working phone lines. She has a brief moment of relief when Mrs. Voorhees, a kindly-seeming woman, shows up in her Jeep, but that relief turns to terror as Mrs. Voorhees is revealed to be our seriously unhinged killer. Years earlier, her son Jason had drowned at the camp on his birthday, Friday the 13th, when the counselors who were supposed to be watching him were instead going to Bone Town. Now, Mrs. Voorhees has made it her mission to stop the camp from ever reopening by any means necessary to protect other kids like Jason. Mrs. Voorhees chases Alice and they battle it out until Alice grabs a machete and chops off Mrs. Voorhees' head. Exhausted and traumatized, Alice gets in a canoe and goes out on the water. The original ending simply had the cops showing up and returning Alice to safety, but Cunningham told Miller that he wanted a real chair jumper of an ending, something that would lull the audience into a false sense of security and then make them literally jump out of their chairs from fright. This scene actually goes on for a long time because he wanted even seasoned horror fans to think the scares were over. Everything about it, the cops arriving, the beautiful calm lake setting, the soft music, is set to mellow out the audience so that their defenses are down. Miller took inspiration from the hand popping up from the grave at the end of Carrie. In the end, as the cops arrive at the shore, a decaying and waterlogged little Jason pops up from the water and drags Alice under. Alice wakes up in the hospital, and the cops say there was no little boy when they found her, so it's left unclear as to whether Jason was real or just a dream. When writing the script, Miller wanted to manipulate the audience's expectations about the killer and turn mom and apple pie on their head. The fact that the killer in this film turned out to be Jason's mom plays a part in Wes Craven's Scream. One of the questions the Ghostface killer asks Drew Barrymore's character in the opening few minutes is, who was the killer in Friday the 13th? Barrymore is insistent that it's Jason and pays the price for getting it wrong. Miller also took inspiration from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. The character of Annie was a nod to Janet Leigh's character in Psycho in that you're introduced to her first and think she's the lead, but then she gets killed not long after. Nightmare on Elm Street later used this expectation with the character of Tina, and Scream would use this with, again, Drew Barrymore's character. Miller also admitted that he purposely made Mrs. Voorhees a character who inverted the Psycho formula, in that she had a split personality with her dead son, whereas Norman Bates was a split personality with his dead mom. When it came time to cast the film, the script wasn't even done yet, so the audition process consisted of just a lot of screaming and reaction shots. Adrienne King, who played Alice, later said she thought she got the part based mostly on how well she could scream and the fact that she had a little bit of improv training. The movie was shot in the great state of New Jersey, my home state, at an actual summer camp, Nobi Bosco, which is still around. This helped cut down on costs since the filmmakers didn't have to build sets. Most of the sequels were filmed in California, and they don't have that authenticity you get when filming in the actual woods at an actual camp. A lot of the cast and crew stayed at the actual camp, and they ate meals in the mess hall and hung out and apparently had a blast. Because of the East Coast location, a lot of the cast were locals who had theater backgrounds but little to no film or TV experience. There were a few notable exceptions. The character of Bill was played by Harry Crosby, son of the famous Bing Crosby, who he appeared with on a bunch of Christmas specials when he was younger. Unlike Jamie Lee Curtis, however, Harry stopped acting not long after this and eventually went on to become an investment banker. Jack was played by a young Kevin Bacon, who had had small roles in a few films, including National Lampoon's Animal House. Bacon said he took the role of Jack mostly to pay his rent. A lot of people involved in this movie were worried about paying their rent. And he also said that he gets asked to sign screenshots from his death scene in this movie more than any other movie he has been in. Also, I love that both he and Johnny Depp in A Nightmare on Elm Street get killed in beds. Aspiring actors, get yourself a horror movie role where you get brutally killed while laying in bed and you're guaranteed to go on to great fame. If you watched my video on A Nightmare on Elm Street, you know that a benefit of low-budget horror was that the filmmakers could usually get one ringer to take a role they might not otherwise have taken a few years before. A ringer is an actor on the downslope of an otherwise impressive career. In Nightmare, it was film legend John Saxon. In Halloween, it was Donald Pleasance. In Friday the 13th, it was film and Broadway star Betsy Palmer. Palmer was known for playing sweet girl-next-door roles, so Cunningham felt she was perfect for the unhinged Mrs. Voorhees, a twist the audience wouldn't see coming. Palmer actually only appears on screen for a total of 13 minutes. For most of the film, the killer was played by a male stand-in, and you can totally tell that if you look closely, because the legs, feet, and hands definitely don't look like Palmer's. Palmer's casting outraged her older fans, who thought she shouldn't do a film like this. For the small role of young Jason, Cunningham originally cast someone he knew very well, his 10-year-old son. But filming had stretched on longer than expected. It was 28 degrees outside in mid to late October, and you can actually see the leaves turning brown in some of the scenes. Cunningham's wife nixed the idea of using their son because she didn't want him shooting in the freezing cold water. So Cunningham called up Ari Lehman, a child actor who'd appeared in Manny's Orphans, a movie Cunningham directed and Miller wrote. Lehman was asked if he knew how to swim, and when he said yes, he was told, "Congratulations, you've got the role." The scene was shot over 3 days, and each day the filmmakers could only really get one take because of the heavy makeup and prosthetics and everything needing to be dried out and reapplied after being in the water. By the time that was done, the light was fading and they couldn't get another one. Jason's look was created by former Vietnam War combat photographer turned makeup and effects maestro Tom Savini. Savini's style was cutting edge, and after the film came out, he went on to become a rock star of the horror genre, bringing a bloody realism unseen up until that point. Audiences wanted to know how each kill was done so convincingly and so terrifyingly. Savini would actually go to screenings and sit in the back in the dark so he could see the audience's reaction to Jason at the end. Another element of the film that made it so frightening was the now iconic score. Composer Harry Manfredini came up with the famous music that follows along with the killer when he was watching a cut of Betsy Palmer's villain reveal scene. When she switches into Jason's voice, she begs, "Kill her, mommy, kill her." Manfredini took the first sounds of kill and the first sounds of mommy and said ki, ma, into an echoplex, which echoed the sounds to make it k, 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 ma, ma, ma. And everyone knows exactly what that is since it's been in pretty much every Friday the 13th since. Savini and Manfredini, my fellow spooky Italian-American horror goombas. Friday the 13th's budget was around $550,000, and you know I love talking about how they do those low-budget horror effects. For Kevin Bacon's death scene where he's lying on the bed and is stabbed up through his neck with an arrow, he was actually crouching on his knees under the bed, looking up at the ceiling with his head pushed up through a hole in the mattress. Savini created a fake latex neck and torso, and the arrow was shoved up through the fake neck. Savini and his assistant, Tasso N. Stavrakis, were under the bed operating a pump filled with blood that would pour out of the wound. The pump actually got clogged, and Stavrakis had to think fast because they'd only created one fake chest and neck, and that meant they had to get this just right in one take. So he grabbed the tube and blew into it, which created the extra realistic and gruesome effect of some of the blood bubbling and spraying while it's flowing. When Savini heard that Mrs. Voorhees would meet her end with a hatchet through the neck, he apparently asked Cunningham if he wanted a real head with a fake hatchet or a fake hatchet with a real head. Ultimately, he went with a fake head, creating a replica of Betsy Palmer's own head. There's a cut right after Alice swings the hatchet, but unlike in previous films where it would cut and then you'd usually see a mannequin head just rolling away in poor lighting, Mrs. Voorhees' head goes flying, and her neck stump is clearly visible, with more fake blood being pumped up and spraying out. Those hairy knuckled hands that groped for a second at the air after the beheading are Stavrakis', who stood in for Palmer. Distributed in the US by Paramount Pictures, Friday the 13th was released in early May of 1980 and was an instant hit, especially among teenagers. Critics, however, weren't so keen on it. They had no idea why anyone would want to see it and dismissed it as being pure escapist violence, the exact reason audiences were flocking to see it. The hate and vitriol from critics only made kids want to see it even more. Critic Gene Siskel hated the movie so much that he spoiled the ending for his Chicago Tribune readers to try and dissuade people from going to see it. He wrote, "The killer turns out to be a little old lady who is grieving the death of her son who drowned there." He also famously called director Sean Cunningham one of the most despicable creatures that has ever infested the film industry. Then he went a step further and gave out Betsy Palmer's address, the actress who plays Mrs. Voorhees, directing his readers to send her hate mail about the film, which, hey, go screw yourself, Siskel. I mean, I know he's dead, but still, not cool, man. Critics hated it so much that Friday the 13th was nominated for a Razzie for the worst picture of the year, and Betsy Palmer was nominated for worst actress. Another hater was the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, the organization who oversaw the film rating system at the time. They felt that the movie got away with having too much violence and blood for its R rating and went hard on the sequels, forcing the filmmakers to cut out more and more stuff or else risk getting an X rating, a relative death knell for films. That X rating was replaced by the NC-17 rating in 1990. There honestly really isn't even that much gore in the film. Cunningham wanted it to be more like a roller coaster ride, where most of the fun is the anticipation before that one big drop. For the TV version, the filmmakers only had to cut about 20 seconds out of it to make it suitable for TV, so it was definitely more of a perception the MPAA had that it was super violent and gory instead of the reality. A lot of critics saw Friday the 13th as a morality tale about things like underage sex, promiscuity, and drug use. But the filmmakers have dismissed that, as have fans and some critics in more recent years. Defenders claim that the movie is more about the dangers of motherly love gone wrong and possessiveness and the inability to let go and move on. They argue that you're not supposed to side with Mrs. Voorhees. The teens are just being teens and having fun and doing what teens do. One defender details how far removed the film is from the sexist, misogynistic trash it was accused of being. The final girl, Alice, isn't a virgin since she's obviously having a relationship with the much older Steve. She also flirts, smokes pot, and plays strip Monopoly. Additionally, just as many men die in the film as women, and the killer turns out to be a woman and mother. That being said, Friday the 13th sets up a lot of horror tropes that set the template for 80s slashers. A lot of these are paid homage to in one of my favorite horror movies, Cabin in the Woods. First off, the teens are simply drawn archetypes that are easily recognized and related to by audiences. These are usually the jock, the funny guy, the pretty popular cheerleader type, the soulful and smarter than the others final girl who has one or two characteristics that make her feel more fleshed out, the obnoxious teenager you're actually hoping will die, the promiscuous one who does something naughty. They're also just a little bit on the dumb or clueless side without being out and out stupid. This allows the audience to feel smarter than the victims and gives them all those good, "What are you doing? Don't go in there" moments. The teens are sequestered away from adults and the rest of the world, and also, even if there were adults, you inherently can't trust them. The cop in the film is more concerned about the teens misbehaving than he is about them getting killed. And the teens usually are killed right before or after after they're about to have a good time. Another trope is that there's always someone warning the teens of their fate before it happens. In Friday the 13th, it's the character referred to as Crazy Ralph, who serves as a Greek chorus to shout warnings that are ignored. Cabin in the Woods hilariously parodied this with the character of Mordecai, the Harbinger. There's also the unseen killer, shown as a series of POV shots. They're made to feel like an unstoppable force of nature that it would be almost impossible to survive. The kills are frequent, interesting, and unique. There's a creepy and discordant score and music theme that goes along with the killer, and then there's one final jump scare at the end. A lot of horror movies from here on out follow this recipe almost to a T. And because we have a template, that means you also know how to survive and what to expect if you ever find yourself dropped in the middle of a campy 80s slasher. First, if we see your boobies, you're not long for this world. In fact, keep your sneakers and your clothes on at all times, because if you're barefoot and in your panties, you're dead. If you start hearing creepy music, you're a goner. If you haven't seen your friend in a little while, they're dead. Bye-bye, friend. Never go to Bone Town. Don't trust any adults. The presence of cops does not make you safe. Nancy's father in A Nightmare on Elm Street was a cop, and he didn't do crap. Plus, one of them died while in the police station. If your car breaks down, you're screwed. If there's a storm, you're screwed. If you're responsible in any way for the death of a kid, you're screwed. Pumpkinhead reinforced this last one. If you hear a voice calling for help, you're dead. That's a trap. If someone shines a light in your face, you're dead. That's the killer. This is a weird one, but don't play any games, board games or otherwise. In Friday the 13th, they play Strip Monopoly. When Agatha All Along paid homage to this movie in the episode Darkest Hour, Wake Thy Power, they were playing with the Ouija board. In Cabin in the Woods, it was Truth or Dare. Bad things happen when games are afoot. Also, everything is a weapon that could kill you. If there's a machete laying around, that's gonna kill someone. If there's a bunch of arrows, those are going through people. Surround yourself with soft, fluffy pillows instead. I guess those pillows could be used to smother you. I don't know. If a crazy seeming local gives you advice, take it. If someone is telling you to quit now or to turn back and go home, do it. Don't even think. Just listen to that kooky old man. Also, don't take rides from strangers. If you manage to overpower the killer, don't just knock them out. You gotta go for that killing blow. Alice leaves Mrs. Voorhees alive multiple times in Friday the 13th, and she always recovers. Girl, after you hit her with that fireplace poker, hit her again and again. And if you survive until the very end, just when you think it's over, it's not. Also, if you do survive the movie, odds are you're not going to survive one of the sequels. Those are the rules. Once again, no horror discussion would be complete without a shout out to what I think is the movie's best kill and best one-liner. Here, I gotta give best kill to Kevin Bacon's death in bed by arrow. What can I say? I love a bed death. Best one-liner has gotta be Alice's final line of the film when the cops say they never found any little boy at the lake.
Then he's still there.
And boy was he, still there for a slew of sequels. I'm also adding a new section this time, total body count. The body count in this film is 9. 10 if you count the poor snake that was actually killed during filming, but let's not talk about that. We've got Barry and Claudette, the first 2 teens killed in the opening, dead by knife and machete. Then Annie, death by knife. Ned, also a knife. Jack, stabbed through the throat by an arrow. Marcy, axe in the face. Brenda, death by lots of arrows. Steve, stabbed in the stomach. Bill, death by lots of arrows. Mrs. Voorhees, head cut off by machete. You can also kind of count young Jason, who died by drowning, although that dude's coming back, so he's not really dead. The legacy of Friday the 13th endures even today. Movies like The Burning, My Bloody Valentine, Sleepaway Camp, and Cabin in the Woods paid homage to, or even ripped it off, which is pretty appropriate considering that it started with Sean Cunningham wanting to rip off Halloween. TV shows like Agatha All Along and season 9 of American Horror Story titled 1984 took inspiration from and parodied it. Friday the 13th ultimately became known more for its sequels than that original, which is unfortunately too often overlooked. The following films were sometimes uneven, with what some might call plot holes or continuity issues, although I like to think of those issues more like horror logic. Most of those sequels didn't even take place on Friday the 13th. Cunningham and Miller had no clue that there would ever be sequels. Jason coming out of the lake was purely a device to scare audiences, not a setup for something larger. Once Paramount saw the film's success, they immediately wanted more, including more deaths done in bigger and bigger ways. And just like A Nightmare on Elm Street, they really churned them out. Friday the 13th Part 2 was released just 10 months after the first one in 1981. It introduced Jason as the killer, an unstoppable man with the mind of a child. Friday the 13th Part 3 was released in 3D in 1982 and gave Jason his now iconic hockey mask, which he wore throughout the rest of the series. 1984's 4th installment in the franchise was titled Friday the 13th The Final Chapter, and you'll be shocked to hear that it was not, in fact, the final chapter. That one starred a young Corey Feldman as the kid who ultimately ultimately takes out Jason in the end. The fifth film, 1985's Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, features a Jason imposter doing the killings. Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, was released in 1986. Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, came out in 1988 and featured Lincoln, a girl with telekinesis, battling it out with Jason. 1989's Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, is hilarious and arguably the most campy of the series. The ninth installment was 1993's Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. And the end of that film set up a crossover with A Nightmare on Elm Street's Freddy Krueger when Freddy's glove bursts up from the ground and drags Jason's mask under. Freddy vs. Jason would not come out for a long time though. 2002's Jason X saw Jason in space and it's completely ridiculous. But watch it anyway. Then in 2003, a full decade after the ending of Jason Goes to Hell promised a crossover, Freddy vs. Jason was released, and honestly, I think this one is the best Jason movie. The series was given a reboot in 2009 with Friday the 13th. This was the 12th Friday the 13th film, and there has never been a 13th Friday the 13th. Guys, it's time, and it's right there. Friday the 13th turned into a cultural phenomenon, and thanks to not only the films but also the merchandising, it's considered one of the most successful film franchises of all time. Sean S. Cunningham stayed involved in the series, and Victor Miller went on to have a successful career writing on daytime soaps, which is probably more in line with his so-called wuss status. As of shooting this video, there's a Friday the 13th prequel TV series in the works from A24 titled Crystal Lake, and starring Linda Cardellini as Mrs. Voorhees, with Victor Miller reportedly in the works to come back and help write. And by the way, some of that series is being shot in my hometown of Boonton, New Jersey. Be sure to check out the other video essays on our channel. Let me know in the comments what kind of horror movies you'd like to see me talk about next. I think based on the first two I've done, I gotta do Freddy vs. Jason next. It's a banger, go watch it. Follow me everywhere at Gina Ippy and subscribe to The Witching Hour if you haven't already. Until next time, I'll see you at camp.